Thank you. Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the witness's benefit, I'm not going to be talking about the AUMF, but I think we've discussed that fully, and it's an important topic, and I concur with the direction of the questions that have been asked so far. I'm very concerned about the fact that this is an attack on trade in the Red Sea, which I presume affects the nations along the Red Sea in a very significant way, and yet only Bahrain is participating in preventing or defending against these attacks. What is the administration's effort with Saudi Arabia in terms of becoming more involved in this effort, and is there progress on that front? Mr. Lenderking?
Well, thank you, Senator. I think that's a very apt question to ask as well. I know that from the state side and Secretary Blinken, this was a very significant issue that was raised early on, and we felt, I think as Ambassador Shapiro said, the president had said that this is an international problem. It needs an international response, and certainly we need to see our Gulf partners in the game much more, and I think we all feel that that is the case. There isn't a country in the Gulf that approves of what the Houthis are doing.
But what's happening with the Saudis? Are they getting on board? Is the administration working with them, and the other nations, UAE and so forth? Is there effort in that regard, or is
there certainly is?
They're just saying, hey, no thanks, you guys do it?
Sorry, there's certainly engagement at my level. I won't speak for the Defense Department, but Secretary of State as well, to if anything, expand this coalition, either OPG or the Strike Coalition. And there's very strong recognition that the Gulf partners, I think, to get at Senator Kane's question, this is a multifaceted responsibility. It should not be all on the U.S. and UK.
Where is the economic impact? Who suffers as a result of this? I know that shipping rates for Europe and Asia have gone up significantly, but even in the Atlantic and Pacific, shipping rates have gone up, in part because there's less container capacity as a result of people having to go around the Cape of Good Hope. But who really suffers from this? The Chinese traders suffering? Are the nations along the Red Sea suffering? Who is suffering as a result of what the Houthis are doing? Where's the economic impact the biggest? I guess what I'm getting at is this. Why isn't China putting pressure on the Houthis? Why aren't they putting pressure on Iran? I mean, we're out there, with our flag flying and our men and women in harm's way. China is the nation that I would presume is most impacted by closing off trade to the Red Sea, and yet they're sitting on the sidelines pretending like they're everybody's friend. Why is China not being embarrassed? You mentioned your testimony that the Houthis are suffering international enmity. I don't think they could care less, the Houthis, about international enmity. China cares, however, and putting a spotlight on China's lack of involvement and lack of effort to stop these attacks, I think would be highly effective. Help me with this idea of who suffers the most in terms of trade, and why is China not participating?
I couldn't agree more with you, Senator. I think the burden has to be shared because the pain is being felt in multiple realms and multiple regions. If you look at where the impact is, you look at a country like Egypt where Suez Canal fees are down 50%. It's impacting the currency. It's impacting the ability of their economy to function. You look at the movement of humanitarian supplies into Sudan, a desperately poor situation, violence prevailing there. That is very disturbing. The Ethiopian economy also suffering. And Yemen itself. The Yemenis themselves are being hurt by what the Houthis are doing. The decrease in commercial activity going into Yemen's own ports.
But it strikes me that we're there at huge risk and huge economic impact for ourselves in order to support the Chinese economy and to support the economies of people along the Red Sea who are all sitting back quietly, supporting, in many cases, supporting Iran, who is giving the support that the Houthis are relying upon. I find it, I wonder, what are the strategic options here? One is to say, hey, we're out. You guys want to close down the Red Sea, that's up to you guys, unless you want to step in and protect it. The idea that we're there suffering and these people are not defending themselves and putting pressure on Iran is something I just don't understand. Mr. Chairman, I know my time is up, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Special Envoy Lyndon King, I'd like to spend some time with you. You've been dealt a tough hand. I'd like to talk with you about the designation that the Trump administration made of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, and the fact that shortly after the Biden administration took office, they delisted the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. We saw what's happened in the time in between. There have been attacks on our allies at UAE, attacks on our allies, the Saudis. We've seen attacks on U.S. personnel and our facilities in the Middle East. We've seen a tremendous amount of unrest since that time. And I think you know, but I'm going to read it for my colleagues here, what the designation of a foreign terrorist organization requires. First, it requires that it's a foreign organization. Indeed, the Houthis are. The organization engages in terrorist activity, or it retains the capability and intent to engage in terrorist activity or terrorism. Yes, they do. And finally, the terrorist activity or terrorism of the organization threatens the security of the United States nationals or the national security of the United States. The Houthis meet these requirements. My question for you, was the Trump administration wrong in designating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization?
Well, thank you, Senator. At that time, as you probably know, there was a strong movement within the Trump administration to designate the Houthis. It led to the FTO. A new administration came in, sought to prioritize Yemen as a foreign policy priority. And I believe that effort has borne fruit in terms of the peace process, which I described. But yes, over time.
I heard you describe the peace process, but with all due respect, I also saw the article in Foreign Affairs where our national security advisor claimed that the Middle East was the greatest period of peace we've ever seen. And now we've seen what happens. My question is, what do the Houthis have to do to be declared a foreign terrorist organization? Do they have to kill Americans?
Certainly not. I think we have come down hard with this designation that we have. The FTO is a possibility. I think we can constantly assess the impact of the campaign that we're doing, both the military, the impact of the designation. The SDGT, Senator, that I described will cut off financial networks, their ability to fundraise. It will put some hurt. And if we need to adjust to the FTO, if these attacks continue, then
well, they certainly continued at a rapid pace. I'd like to see more than a little hurt. I'd like to see this addressed, sir. Let me go to another thing that concerns me, and that has to do with the diversion of the aid that we send to Yemen. I think about what Hamas has done with the aid that we've sent to Gaza. I'm deeply concerned that the Houthis may as well divert the aid that we're sending, the U.S. taxpayer-funded humanitarian aid that we're sending into Yemen. And I've got a very disturbing example here. I'm sure there are others. But the Biden administration right now is sending over $1.1 million for the Yemen-based operations of Norwegian People's Aid. Norwegian People's Aid. This is an organization, the NPA, that settled a civil lawsuit with the Department of Justice in 2018 for previously providing training and expert advice to the Iranian military and to Palestinian terrorist groups, including Hamas. And we're sending our tax dollars there. They started receiving them in August of last year, and they're supposed to be receiving them all the way through September of this year. We shouldn't send a penny to an organization like this. So my question to you, and I know this is a tough question to answer, but can you guarantee that our taxpayer dollars that are going to Yemen aren't in some way being diverted to the Houthis to support this activity that we're talking about right now?
Well, Senator, I think that's an incredibly important point. I'm not aware of any taxpayer dollar going to support this type of activity. That should not be happening. That is definitely not within the priorities of our...
Can you guarantee that our taxpayer money won't wind up supporting the Houthis doing exactly what they're doing, which is putting U.S. and many other lives at risk, driving up inflation, not only in the region, as was described by Mr. Shapiro, but it's disrupting supply chains, it's causing cargo shipments to go up, it's causing inflation right here, hurting Americans at home. I'm concerned that we're right back funding both sides of the proposition here by sending this aid there.
Senator, I share the concern. I will certainly take a look at that.
I'd appreciate it. Secretary Blinken could not answer me either when I asked him about the foreign aid that's going into Gaza and that's being diverted by Hamas. Please please address this. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
concern. Yep.
Are you ready to go, Senator Van Hollen? Because you're up.
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to both of you. It's great to see you. And just to my friend, Senator Haggerty, I would suggest everybody look at the statements, including a recent renewal of the statement by David Satterfield, our ambassador, that makes it absolutely clear that when it comes to aid being provided by UN organizations and international NGOs, that he's gotten no reports of diversion, even from our Israeli friends, and I'd be happy to share that with the senator.
If I might, I've had direct reports from the Israelis. That's exactly what's happening.
Well, they haven't reported it to the person on the ground, David Satterfield, who is our coordinator. And that's a statement I've got from him recently, it's a couple days ago. Happy to share it with you.
It would only require Mr. Satterfield to go and ask the National Security Advisor in Israel.
All right, Senator Van Hollen is
All right,
recommended.
thank you. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just have a few more minutes as a result of that. Look, I want to pick up on a couple of questions raised by Senator Kaine and Ambassador Shapiro. Good to see you. Which is there's been lots of discussion here about our actions against the Houthis, and I am fully in support of protecting waterways. But let's also recognize that the Houthi action has been in response to the war on Gaza. Would you not agree with that, Mr. Shapiro?
Thank you, Senator. I'd certainly agree that the Houthis have made the claim that is the original motivation for their attacks. I think they've made some other claims along the way. I would just simply say that whatever the rationale or reason or claim that the Houthis or any other organization would make for conducting these kinds of attacks, there's no legitimacy to them. There's no legitimacy to target international
Ambassador, I agree with you. I agree there's no legitimacy. There's no disagreement there. But isn't it a fact that the Houthi attacks on shipping went down significantly during the period of the humanitarian pause in November?
I believe there was a decline during that period. It was not a complete cessation. Right. And there have been various points when there have been spikes and valleys, so I don't know to what we can attribute that.
Right.
Sometimes I think the decline is in response to our strikes while they reload and prepare for their next strikes.
Well, our strikes, as you know, actually came after this humanitarian pause period.
Correct.
And
That's
so
correct.
their reduction in strikes during that pause period cannot be attributed to the actions we took in terms of strikes. I think the record's pretty clear. But if I could ask you, as you know, the Algerians had a ceasefire resolution at the UN, which we vetoed, but we at the same time said we were going to provide, the United States, were going to propose a UN Security Council resolution. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at some of the provisions that have been put out there by the United States. But one of them indicates that under current circumstances, a major ground offensive into Rafah would result in further harm to civilians and further displacement, including potentially into neighboring countries. Do you agree with that conclusion?
A bit outside my brief to speak about the Security Council resolution. Obviously, the State Department should address that. I will say that in all of our recent engagements with Israel, that includes Secretary Austin's conversations with Minister of Defense Gallant, that includes conversations between our military, we've made very clear that no operation should be considered or undertaken in Rafah without a clear and executable plan and the follow-through to implement it to ensure the safe evacuation of civilians who are taking safe harbor in Rafah and provision for their humanitarian needs as they move.
Well, given that, would you agree that it would be a mistake for the United States to provide more offensive weapons at this time to the Netanyahu government without receiving assurances with respect to actions in Rafah that we've requested?
Well, as you know, Senator, the President has made clear from the beginning of this conflict on October 7th that he will help ensure Israel has what it needs to defend itself following those terrible terrorist attacks and ensuring they can't be repeated, that they must observe the laws of war and laws of armed conflict and ensure that they do the maximum to protect civilians and provide for their humanitarian needs. As you know, the President, very much in dialogue with you, Senator, issued the National Security Memorandum 20, which will help ensure that we receive credible and reliable assurances from all our partners who receive defense services and defense articles and certain defense services.
And I very much appreciate the President taking that action. I think it was an important step, and thank you and the administration and the President, of course, on that. But let me just say, I think it would be sending very mixed signals if prior to receiving clear assurances from the Netanyahu government that they won't take the actions in Rafah that we're worried about, we were to at the same time extend further significant military assistance. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to include in the record a statement made by Samantha Power today from Jordan, where she is standing in front of lots of World Food Program shipments that need to get into Gaza, saying these should be into Gaza. And I would just ask you, Ambassador Shapiro, and both of you, to take back to the President and the administration. 20 senators, 25 actually, I think, wrote the President a letter talking about 5 specific actions the Netanyahu government needs to take to allow more assistance into Rafah, including opening more crossings, things that are common sense measures that in the view of many of us should be taken right now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you both.
Enter that into the record. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. We're going to, Senator Young and I are going to pose a series of second-round questions for you, and I want to start with, I think, this really important series of questions that you got from Senator Kaine and to a certain extent Senator Van Hollen. So listen, I support the actions that the administration has taken because I believe that the United States is the guarantor of the freedom of navigation of international waters. We have an obligation to respond when United States interests are being attacked in commercial waters. But I do worry about the efficacy of a campaign of military strikes when we have seen very little evidence that airstrikes against the Houthis have restored deterrence over the course of a 7-year war with the Saudis, who conducted 23,000 airstrikes. I would note that 9 of the locations targeted by the United States and the UK strikes in January of this year were previously hit by 419 airstrikes in the Saudi-led air war between 2015 and 2022. So if 23,000 airstrikes by the Saudis weren't effective in moving the needle militarily and restoring deterrence, how can we be confident that our campaign of airstrikes is going to have a different outcome?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, we first of all have to understand who we're dealing with. We are dealing with an organization, now especially designated global terrorist organization, that simply thinks the rules don't apply to it. They are backed by the common denominator of a range of threats around the region by Iran, which provides weapons, which we've discussed, which provides intelligence, which provides targeting information, which provides financial support and training. And they, too, have an agenda, and that agenda includes to try to get the United States to depart the Middle East. And so these are the actors we're dealing with, and what our strikes are intended to demonstrate, first of all, is that we will continue to degrade and remove their capability if they continue to conduct these attacks. We will also try to interdict as much as we can and work with our partners on that. We will, of course, defend those who are transiting the waters, and that we will be prepared to take additional actions if there are obviously additional threats against us or against our people. We have demonstrated that very clearly in our responses to the tragic attack on Tower 22 in Jordan, and there was a very strong U.S. response in Iraq and Syria against IRGC-affiliated targets, individuals and facilities. And it has, until now, led to a quiet period since February 4th. We don't want to take that for granted. But it has demonstrated to Iran, again, one of the key enablers of the Houthis, that we are prepared to respond.
Right, but the extent of the military infrastructure inside Yemen, especially after 7 years of developing partnership with Iran, is extensive. And they have shown over the course of 7 years of significant airstrikes from the Saudis, sometimes with U.S. participation and help, the ability to very quickly rebuild their capacity. There's not a lot of evidence that during the period of these airstrikes we have had any effective deterrent. Do we actually believe there is a finite amount of infrastructure that can be hit and destroyed so as to change the reality inside the Red Sea through military operations alone?
We know that they still have capability. We sort of have a good sense of the numerator, what we have been able to eliminate and what they've used, and we don't fully know the denominator. That's obviously information we're working to develop, and obviously we're working to prevent that from expanding through interdictions, and we're working with partners to prevent other smuggling activities. I can't tell you that we know that there's a moment when they will decide that they've had enough. That is our intention, to make sure that they understand that if they continue to target us and our innocent mariners, that we will work with our partners to protect them, and that we will respond as appropriate to conduct these acts of self-defense.
Let me ask you one last question on this question of authorization. I do agree that it is a very troubling and creative interpretation of Article 2 authority to extend protection to partners. I agree with Senator Kaine that that is probably not a theory in good standing. But let me ask you if you believe that Article 2 authority gives you the ability to attack partners of those that are directing attacks at U.S. partners. I'm asking, of course, about Iran. Do you have existing Article 2 authority, having identified Iran as a participant in these Houthi attacks, to launch strikes against Iranian assets or Iran itself?
I'd really be overstepping to speculate on authorities that would be cited for strikes that have not taken place. I will say that the President's Article 2 authority was very much relevant in the response strikes in Iraq and Syria following the attack on Tower 22 in Jordan, in which 3 U.S. service members were killed. And I do think that has an impact. That has an impact in Iran's thinking, since the targets included IRGC-affiliated facilities, and it included individuals that IRGC was well known to support in their attacks on the United States. So I think they take that seriously, and they should take that seriously.
Senator